After what happened during the governorship election in Lagos State, where many Igbos and other people were disenfranchised, they weren't allowed to vote because they couldn't prove that they are Yorubas. Of course, Yorubas also fell victim. This led to calls by many people. In fact, their own brothers, Igbo people, were at the forefront of calling their brothers to go back to the eastern Nigeria, their homeland. Yes, it's very reasonable because preventing someone from voting because he's not indigenous to the area simply means he's not wanted there. So the wise thing to do is to go back to your homeland where no one can intimidate or disenfranchise you during elections. As if the denial of voting rights wasn't enough, then came the demolition of many buildings in Lagos State. Of course, not only Igbos were affected, but the sentiments surrounding everything that happened recently, so many people felt that they were targeted unnecessarily. These demolitions now made more people to lend their voice. The calls for Igbos to go back to the east have never been louder, except maybe during the Civil War. Now, let's explore why Igbo people will never move to their homeland en masse as people are expecting. Before we do that, let's create a background story. In the 70s, immediately after the war, in the 80s, in the 90s, even up to early 2000s, many Igbo men doing business in eastern Nigeria still had their Lagos offices as branch offices. In fact, majority of them had their main businesses in Onitsha, Aba, Enugu, all other cities in the southeast. What changed? What made many of them to convert their former branch offices in Lagos to the main headquarters and even go as far as expanding into other markets in Lagos? The reason is very simple and it's not what many people think. They always say Eastern ports are not working or Net port is not working, that Eastern governors should form an alliance and build a seaport, this, that. That's not even the main problem. The main problem is just the downward spiral of Nigerian economy. Besides, Onne Port is working. It has always been working. Many Onitsha businessmen have moved thousands of containers from there up until the mid-2000s, until the EFCC stepped in. But that's a story for another day. The main problem with Onne Port is that there is very low traffic there. If you're a businessman trying to move your goods that you purchased in China, India, or other Southeast Asian countries, you find out from the shipping companies that even in 3 months or sometimes 6 months, they will not be able to have a vessel that will go to an airport. This is just the problem. Many of them are only shipping to Lagos, Tinkan, Apapa Wharf. Despite the fact that most of the time they arrive at Apapa, they will still spend 1 or 2 weeks to offload the containers. But because of the high traffic, many container vessels only go to Lagos on a regular basis. So this is the problem here. In business, time is money. No businessman will have the option of shipping his goods under 1 month and leave that to choose shipping the goods under 3 months. It doesn't make any business sense. So how will Onitsha businessmen create traffic in Onne Port so that shipping companies will start moving containers there on a regular basis like they do in Lagos? It is very simple. They've done it before, they can do it again. They will just make sure through their market association that all businessmen who import goods from China must move their containers through Onne Port. If this agreement is sealed, they will just need to meet a shipping company, maybe Green Line or any other company. Just assure them that all of them must move their goods through Onne Port. They will dedicate a vessel that will be shipping containers to Onne Port on a regular basis. And before you know it, other shipping companies will dedicate vessels to Onne Port. That's how you create the traffic. If they are able to achieve this, they will save a lot of money on haulage costs because of the distance from Onne Port to Aba and Onitsha compared to Lagos, Apapa to Onitsha. So they will save a lot of money, not just in moving containers, but also on insurance. Because once a container is being delivered outside Lagos, the businessman is expected to pay a deposit to the shipping company. Because we all know how good Nigerian roads are. Many containers fall along the highway. So in order to cover the cost of the damage of the container, the shipping company requires the businessman to make a deposit. If the container returns in one piece, then the deposit will be paid back to the businessman. And if it is not, the money is gone. Of course, there are ways around this. The container can be offloaded in Lagos and be loaded on a truck to be delivered in Onitsha, but not all types of goods qualify for this kind of transshipment. All these added costs could have been saved if there is sufficient rail infrastructure that will link all the ports to major cities in Nigeria. So that wherever a businessman can be found in Nigeria, whether you are in Onitsha, Aba, Meduguri, Kanu, anywhere you find yourself in Nigeria, you can just pay the shipping company and the port authority will deliver that container to you at your doorstep. That way, no city, whether it's a port city or near a port city, will not have an undue advantage. Because when other merchants have extra costs running into millions, people around the seaport will have an undue advantage. They can be able to sell their goods at a lower price because their expenditure is far lower compared to the people in the hinterlands. In order for a businessman to be competitive in Nigerian market, the person must have a presence in Lagos, no matter how small. That's the reality. So this makes Lagos a melting pot of sorts for business, for leisure, people who come into Lagos on a regular basis for business. At a time they will say, all this money I spend on hotels every day, let me just rent a one-bedroom apartment. Yes, it's reasonable. The person will save more costs. If the person comes to Lagos on a regular basis, maybe once a week, it's very wise because for someone to survive in a business, the person must cut costs at the lowest level. If you don't do that, at a time you will do stock taking, you will find out that you have eaten into your startup capital. So every businessman always tries to cut costs at every level. At the stage of buying the products abroad, you have to do the calculations very well. At the level of shipping, the same thing. Even when it arrives in Nigeria, you have to save all the costs you can before the goods are offloaded at your warehouse. So you can understand why many businessmen from the southeast moved majority of their business to Lagos. They did it for economic reasons, and in the process, they are also taking advantage of the Lagos market. Not that Onitsha market depends solely on the residents. No, not at all. Many people from northern Nigeria, Cameroon, even West African countries all come to shop in Onitsha because it is simply where you get the cheapest goods around. Yes, many Onitsha businessmen are known to have huge capitals running into millions of dollars. When they are talking about their consignment arriving in Nigeria, they are talking about a shipload of containers. Some of them ship hundreds of containers at a time, some in 50s, some in 20s. It depends on the type of goods they are dealing on. And because they control huge capitals, their profit margin is actually one of the lowest in Nigeria. Some of them are looking at 50 naira or less per product, depending on the type of product. Unlike people who don't control huge capitals, their margins are always higher. That's why in some cases, people in Lagos go to Onitsha to buy goods and come back and sell in Lagos. These are businessmen that have shops in Lagos. This is the beauty of free market and competition. If you remember, when the Lebanese used to dominate Nnamdi Azikiwe in Lagos Island, until Onitsha businessmen with their huge capitals came into Lagos, today you can't see a single shop owned by a Lebanese in Nnamdi Azikiwe. They simply drove them out with competition. This didn't happen in Nigeria alone. It happened in West African countries where the Lebanese used to make huge profits. But when Nigerian men arrived there with huge capitals, they drove the price down with massive competition. Today, in most West African markets, the Lebanese are no longer found. Most of you living in West African countries can attest to this. So even if all the physical infrastructure that is currently lacking are built by the government to reduce the undue advantage that businessmen in Lagos have over others in other parts of Nigeria, the Igbo men doing business in Lagos will never leave to other places because there is simply money to be made everywhere. Some of them started out by going to China to buy products to resell in Nigeria. And they noticed that all the places they buy these goods, they are required to make orders for the goods. And the people selling these goods always call the factory to confirm the orders, to place the orders on their behalf. So they became curious. They wanted to trade directly with the factory themselves. But one problem arose: language barrier. They couldn't speak Chinese. At that time, most of the factories didn't have any single worker who could make a sentence in English. So some of them went as far as learning Chinese in order to be able to cut costs in business. Immediately, some of them understood basic Chinese. They started buying directly from the factory, and their products became cheaper in Nigeria. Some of them went as far as renting a shop in China. They had to get residency, of course, and they started buying from the factories and selling to Nigerians coming to buy in China. This same thing happened in Dubai in the early days, in the early 2000s, when the GSM license was auctioned. Many hustlers used to go to Dubai to buy phones and come back with them in their hand luggages. But when some businessmen came into the market, they simply sent their workers to go and live in Dubai. They got all the necessary papers to make sure they live without problems. Their job is simply to package the type of phones that they want and ship them to Nigeria. They will receive it the same day. So while a hustler is still trying to arrange his money to buy a flight ticket to go to Dubai and buy phones, someone with mega money has already gotten the phone models that he will buy in Dubai. He has already gotten it in Nigeria. So this is how competition works. There is always money to be made everywhere, not just in Lagos, in the north, in Abuja, anywhere in the world. There's always money to be made. That is the nature of many Igbo businessmen. Thanks for watching.